The stars are right, and that means it's time for another episode of The Whisper in Darkness. I'm your host, the man from Leng. Thank you very much for joining me today. On this episode, I am reviewing the Survivor cards in the Wages of Sin, the second Mythos pack in the Circle Undone cycle. There are spoilers throughout if you care about that sort of thing. If you enjoy what you hear, like, comment, and subscribe. One of the Survivor cards in this pack has already been described as broken, so let's get started. The first Survivor card in the pack is Drawing Thin. It's a free Survivor asset that has a willpower skill icon and the talent trait. It has the game text reaction. When you initiate a skill test, exhaust Drawing Thin. Increase the difficulty of this skill test by 2, gain 2 resources, or draw 1 card. Drawing Thin is a powerful resource and card draw engine for survivors, so much so that some players have already come to the conclusion that it is broken. Let's take a look at the evidence to see for ourselves whether that is the case. Resource generation and card draw are extremely rare abilities in the Survivor card pool, which is likely by design. Each class has its strengths and weaknesses, and survivors are expected to scrape by with fewer resources and cards than their fellow investigators. For the longest time, survivor investigators who wanted to generate a few extra resources had emergency cash, period. If investigators wanted to draw additional cards, the only option was Rabbit's Foot, which received a level 3 upgrade in the Return to the Night of the Zealot. The playing field shifted slightly with the release of Madame Labranche in A Phantom of Truth. Labranche could get you a resource or a card once each turn, but she was balanced by the fact that you could use her ability only if you had no resources or cards. Survivor investigators didn't receive another card to generate resources or draw cards until the release of the skill Take Heart in Heart of the Elders. Take Heart awards investigators with 2 resources and 2 cards. However, it also has a fairly significant cost, that is, the investigators must fail a skill test. Now, failing a skill test is not a very high bar to clear for Survivor investigators, most of whom have below average intellect. Botch 1 Investigate action, which is the easiest skill test to initiate, and you're off to the races. If you're playing a survivor such as Calvin Wright, chances are you're going to fail a lot of skill tests while you're getting set up. Take Heart's power is balanced by the fact that it's a one-shot skill card that survivors will play maybe once or twice per game. Survivors have all sorts of recursion tricks that may make it relatively easy for them to get around that restriction. However, they've still got to fail that skill test, and if you're using all of your recursion tricks with the intent of failing a lot of skill tests, especially skill tests that you initiate during your turn, you're probably not making much progress advancing the act deck. So along comes Drawing Thin, which lets investigators increase the difficulty of a skill test by 2 to gain 2 resources or draw 1 card. This card is bonkers on so many levels. First, Drawing Thin is free, and as we all know, free cards are fantastic. Second, it's non-unique. Survivor investigators can have 2 copies of Drawing Thin on the table and exhaust both, increasing the difficulty of a skill test by 4 to gain 4 resources, 2 cards, or 2 resources and 1 card. Third, there's nothing on the card that says you have to succeed at the skill test to generate the cards and resources. You get them regardless of whether you succeed or fail. However, if you're able to pass the skill test regardless of the difficulty boost, you get the resources, cards, and the benefits of the action, such as discovering a clue, dealing damage, or evading an enemy. Piggybacking resource generation and card draw on something you wanted to do anyway is a very potent combination. Fourth, you can play Drawing Thin in combination with the other failure tech, such as Rabbit's Foot and Take Heart, to generate a lot of cards and resources by failing skill tests. In fact, Drawing Thin makes those cards more likely to trigger, since you're more likely to fail the skill test once you've bumped up the skill test difficulty. Let's assume for a moment that you have Drawing Thin and Rabbit's Foot on the table and you play Take Heart during the skill test. If you fail, you will generate either 4 resources and draw 3 cards, or generate 2 resources and draw 4 cards. If you've got that second copy of Drawing Thin down on the table, you get another 2 resources or a card on top of that. If you've upgraded to level 3 Rabbit's Foot, you get to pick one of the cards you draw from the top X cards of your deck, where X is the amount by which you failed the skill test by. That is quite a windfall for failing a skill test. It's worth noting, however, that you've dedicated 6 deck slots, roughly 20% of an average deck, to failing skill tests at this point. While a certain amount of failure is to be expected when you're playing a scenario, dedicating 20% of your deck to it seems like a lot. While you can certainly use Drawing Thin to fail skill tests on purpose, I'm not wild about that idea. The benefits of blowing a skill test you initiate isn't that great if you only have one copy of Drawing Thin on the table and you're not playing the other failure tech. You're also sacrificing some all-important tempo in the process. Now, this is less of an issue if an encounter card triggers the skill test, but failing skill tests on encounter cards tends to have dire consequences that may outweigh any resources or cards you gain. Drawing Thin really shines if you're able to pull off the skill test despite upping the difficulty. For many survivors and off-class survivors, this is not as hard as it sounds on easy or standard difficulty. Let's look at a couple of examples. First up, Silas Marsh or William York armed with a fire axe. Silas and William have base combat skill values of 4 while armed with fire axe. If they take a fight action against an enemy and trigger the response on 2 copies of Drawing Thin, they'll raise the difficulty of the skill test by 4 and gain 4 resources. Then they may turn around and spend up to 3 of those resources to use the free triggered ability on fire axe to boost their combat skill values by up to 6. Depending on the fight value of the enemy, the number of resources spent and cards committed to the skill test, Silas and William may even turn a profit. That is an amazing deal for doing something that comes naturally to them. You can pull off the same trick with Rita Young. If you equip Rita with track shoes from the Circle Undone, she has an agility skill value of 6. If you throw in Peter Sylvester from the Dunwich Legacy, she's up to a 7. If Rita takes an action to evade an enemy and triggers 2 copies of Drawing Thin, she may gain resources and or cards, which she can then use to power talents such as Dig Deep or Cornered to pass the skill test. Once again, depending on the evade value of the enemy, the resources she spends, and the cards she commits, Rita can turn a profit evading enemies turn after turn. Finn Edwards is another investigator who can abuse Drawing Thin, this time in combination with lockpicks from the Path to Carcosa. If Finn is using lockpicks, he has a skill value of 8 during an investigate action. Finn can trigger 2 copies of Drawing Thin at all but the highest shroud value locations and still likely succeed by 2 on the skill test, so he doesn't break one of his picks. If Finn succeeds, he grabs not only a clue but a pile of resources and or cards. Agnes Baker can boost her willpower to obscene levels using mystic cards such as Holy Rosary, St. Hubert's Key, or David Renfield. Combine that with Drawing Thin and any mystic card that depends on willpower, and you will be generating resources and drawing cards for days. Meanwhile, Minte Fan can abuse Drawing Thin in combination with higher education. Jacking the difficulty of an intellect skill test by 4 is unlikely to phase Min when she can simply counter that increase by spending some of the resources she gains from that card on higher education. Now, I'm sure there are plenty of other ways to abuse Drawing Thin, but I think you get the idea. You could use Drawing Thin to fail skill tests on purpose, but why bother doing that if your investigator can take an action, trigger 1 or 2 copies of Drawing Thin and reap the rewards of succeeding on the action and Drawing Thin? I think it's interesting that Fantasy Flight released Drawing Thin and the optional list of taboos in the new FAQ at roughly the same time, because I suspect Drawing Thin will make the next iteration of that list. Drawing Thin is a fantastic resource generation and card draw engine for survivors and off-class survivors. Raising the difficulty of a skill test by 2 is supposed to prevent investigators from abusing it, but honestly, that's not a very high bar to clear for investigators sporting high base skill values, especially on easy or standard difficulty. Even raising the skill test difficulty by 4 isn't much of a deterrent when you can use the resources and cards generated by Drawing Thin to pass the test and still turn up a small profit. There are quite a few investigators who can use Drawing Thin, and most of them can put together some sort of combination of cards to abuse it. You know a card is too good when every investigator who can play it will play it regardless of the downside. Now, traditionally, survivors have been characterized by a lack of resources and card draw. Drawing Thin simply shatters that, which may not have been designer Matt Newman's intention with this card. The second survivor card in the pack is Belly of the Beast. It's a 1-cost event with willpower and agility skill icons and the gambit and trick traits. It has the game text, fast, play after you successfully evade an enemy by 2 or more, discover 1 clue at that enemy's location. It's easy to forget there is a second survivor card in this pack after the powerhouse that is Drawing Thin, but Belly of the Beast is quite good in its own right. The ability to discover a clue at a location without making a skill test is extremely powerful, and Belly of the Beast gives evasion-based investigators a way to cheat a clue here and there while they keep on moving. Belly of the Beast costs only 1 resource and it's fast, so the price is right. There is just one catch: you do need to successfully evade an enemy by 2 or more. Succeed by 2 is usually a rogue mechanic, and it lends itself to investigators who have already very high base skill values. Rita Young is the clear standout among survivor investigators here. Rita is rocking 5 agility out of the box, throw a pair of track shoes on her and or partner her with Peter Sylvester, and she's sitting pretty on an agility of 6 or 7 in no time flat. Rita spends more time at the track than hitting the books in the Orn Library, so her intellect is below average. Belly of the Beast is an easy way for her to compensate for that shortcoming, enabling her to cheat clues at a High Shroud location while she runs circles around enemies. There are several other survivors and off-class survivors who may be interested in Belly of the Beast depending on the build. Finn Edwards, Silas Marsh, and Wendy Adams have agility skill values of 4. All 3 can play Track Shoes and Peter Sylvester to boost their agility to 6. Finn and Wendy can pick up Cat Burglar once they've gained a few experience points, while Finn has the additional option of playing Lola Santiago. Belly of the Beast is cheaper and faster than Finn's other option to cheat clues, namely Intel Report from the Secret Name. However, Belly of the Beast does take up one of Finn's 5 out of class slots, so he'll have to make some sacrifices elsewhere if he wants to play it in combination with a bunch of other survivor cards. Now, Silas can't play Cat Burglar or Lola Santiago, but there are plenty of skill cards loaded with agility skill icons that he can use to help him succeed by 2 once Track Shoes and Peter Sylvester are on the table. And if Silas doesn't happen to need the skill card he committed to the skill test, he can always return it to his hand with his response to use it at another time. Agnes Baker and Marie Lambeau usually play Drawn to the Flame to discover clues without making a skill test, but they may want to consider Belly of the Beast if they play it in combination with either level of Mists of Rillier from the Forgotten Age cycle. Agnes, for example, has a willpower of 5 with Mists of Rillier, 0 and 8 with Mists of Rillier 4, so successfully evading an enemy by 2 becomes a lot more viable once she upgrades. It seems unlikely that Marie will play Belly of the Beast given her above-average intellect, her access to the Seeker card pool, and her limited out-of-class slots, but the option is certainly there for enterprising deck builders. Belly of the Beast will have difficulty stealing the spotlight from Drawn Thin, but evasion-oriented investigators will welcome the opportunity to cheat a clue here and there. It's cheap, fast, and succeeding by 2 shouldn't be that challenging given the plethora of extra agility options available in the Rogue and Survivor card pools. The card is a natural fit for Rita Young, but creative deck builders may find a home for it in other survivors and off-class survivors too. That's going to do it for my look at the survivor cards in the Wages of Sin. I'm not sure what else to say about Drawing Thin that hasn't already been said. It is a fantastic card that is really ripe for abuse. If survivors and off-class survivors struggled with resource generation and card draw in the past, they really have no excuses now. Drawing Thin is simply that good. Belly of the Beast pales in comparison, but it's still a good card that is a welcome addition to evasion decks. Discovering a clue without making a skill test is very, very good, and the survivors who are most likely to use this card aren't the most intellectual among investigators. Overall, the Wages of Sin is an exceptionally strong pack that is going to be a very tough act to follow, especially if you enjoy playing Seeker, Mystics, or Survivors. Really good stuff here for the game, and I'm looking forward to seeing what happens, what we get in for the greater good. That's going to do it for this review. If you enjoy what you hear, remember to like, comment, and subscribe. If you need to contact me, I can be reached at manfromleng@gmail.com. I'm also on Twitter at manfromlang. Until the stars are right, keep your shotgun close and your elder sign closer. Take care out there, and happy investigating.